The exit interview transcript, 3 years old, in which Lily had said, "I just want to move on," in the flat, exhausted voice of someone for whom moving on was the only option, because staying had already cost too much. And the memo. 1 page, dated 3 years and 4 months ago. Departmental review of the incident involving L. Hale. It is the department head's recommendation that the matter be handled internally, without formal escalation. Signed, F. Hassan, head translator. He looked at the signature. He had looked at it 4 months ago, when the file reached him in Geneva, and the signature had been a letter and a name. Clean, deniable. The kind of administrative decision that protected an institution at the cost of a person. Lily had left Meridian within a month of that memo. She had gone to Edinburgh. She had taken 2 years to tell him what had happened, and when she finally had, sitting in a restaurant in Geneva with her hands around a glass of wine she wasn't drinking, what she'd said was, "Nobody did anything, Jack. I asked for help, and the department above mine sent a memo, and then it was just over." He had read the memo in the restaurant, on his phone, while his food went cold. He had looked at the signature, F. Hassan. He had known, in that moment, that he was going to come back. He spread the file across his desk now, and looked at the signature, and looked at the floor of the translation space, visible through the glass, empty now. Fatima's desk, the only one with anything personal on it. The sticky notes, the photograph, the Arabic line in handwriting that was someone else's. The heart knows what the eyes haven't seen yet. He pressed the memo flat with his hand. The plan was simple. It had always been simple. He returned to Meridian. He moved the translation department to his floor. Proximity was the first requirement of any strategy. He applied pressure. Professionally, methodically. He found the thing that mattered most to her, and he used the leverage of it, quietly, until the narrative around what had happened 3 years ago became impossible to suppress. Until there was accountability. Until whatever she had protected, the man who had made his sister feel worthless in her own workplace, was exposed. He had built this plan the way he built every plan. Cleanly. From the evidence outward. He had believed, when he built it, that the distance between himself and F. Hassan was safe. That she was a signature on a memo. That he could be in the same building as a signature on a memo and feel nothing except the cold, focused clarity of purpose. He had believed this completely. Then, 43 pages had scattered across his floor. He put the memo back in the file. He sat back in his chair. He thought about a woman who knew exactly how many pages she had dropped, who crouched on the floor of a stranger's office and tapped the edges straight, and looked up at him from that crouched position, with dark eyes and zero performance of distress, and said with complete straightforwardness, "I translated the document." He thought about a line in Arabic that a dead woman had said to her daughter, now pressed onto a sticky note at the edge of a desk on the floor below the one where that woman had been made to feel small and then administratively forgotten. He closed the file. He opened it again. He looked at the signature. F. Hassan. The same name. The same person. The timeline was unambiguous. She had been department head. The memo bore her signature. These were facts, and Jackson Hale had always trusted facts above everything else, because facts didn't rearrange themselves for your comfort. Facts held. He told himself this now, firmly, the way you tell yourself things that need to stay true. He told himself the coffee cups were operational, a detail to establish proximity, to make her feel the floor was safe before he used it to apply pressure. He told himself the break room lunch had been a calculated insertion, not a compulsion. He told himself that noticing the Arabic note, noticing which note among 7 bore someone else's handwriting, was pattern recognition, not attention. Not the specific quality of attention that costs you something. He told himself he was in control of this. He closed the file. He put it in the drawer. He sat in his office in the quiet dark of the emptying building, and he pressed his hands flat on the desk in front of him, and he looked out at London, and he did not move for a long time. On the other side of the floor, in the translation space with the good view, the screen on Fatima's computer had gone to sleep, and the sticky note in her mother's handwriting was visible in the corridor light through the glass, and the break room held the ghost warmth of a coffee machine used twice that afternoon within 40 minutes of each other. He knew the timing. He had noticed the timing. He told himself he had noticed it for strategic reasons. His hands, flat on the desk, pressed down. She found him in the break room on Saturday. She wasn't supposed to be in the office on Saturday. She had come in for 45 minutes. The literary contract had a Monday deadline. She needed the secondary reference files she'd left in her desk. She was in and out. She was not lingering. She was lingering. She had made tea, and she was reading at the break room table. The same table, by the same window, in the same seat she had been sitting in when he'd chosen the wrong chair on purpose and pretended it was the light. When the door opened and he walked in. He stopped. She looked up. They looked at each other with the mutual surprise of 2 people who had each apparently decided the other wouldn't be in today. "Mr. Hale," she said. "Ms. Hassan," he said. He made his coffee. She read her book. The break room on a Saturday had a different quality. Stripped of the weekday machinery of purpose and schedule and the performance of productivity. Just 2 people and the Italian machine and the gray London morning leaning against the window. "You came in on a Saturday," he said, without turning from the machine. "The contract has a Monday deadline. You could work from home." "I think better here." She paused. "I don't know why. Something about the building." She looked out the window. "It's like the quiet here is a different quality than home quiet. Home quiet reminds me of things. Here, quiet is just—" She stopped herself. She was explaining herself again. She did this, she noticed, with him, produced more than she intended. Like his silence was a container she kept trying to fill. "Sorry, that was more than you asked for." He turned around. He had his coffee. He was looking at her with the dark, unhurried eyes, and he said, "What does it remind you of?" She looked at him. "The quiet at home," he said. "What does it remind you of?" No one had asked her this. In 14 months of grief moving through her like weather, no one had asked her what the silence reminded her of, because most people were afraid of the answer and were kindly, carefully steering around it. She looked at the table. "My mother," she said. "She was quiet herself, still. The kind of woman who filled rooms not with volume, but with presence. She liked quiet. She found things in it. I used to not understand that. Now She stopped. Now I can't find her in the quiet. So I come here, where the quiet is just quiet." She looked up. He was very still across the break room. His expression was doing something she hadn't seen before. Not shut down, not managed, not the controlled nothing of the boardroom version of him. something open and pained, and immediately carefully contained before she could fully read it. Like a door opening an inch and then caught by a hand from the other side. He said, "I'm sorry." 2 words, flat and low. And she knew, with the instinct of a person who had heard those words 1,000 times in the 14 months and could parse the weight behind them, that these were not the performance of condolence. They were not the social mechanism. They were something given up, something released briefly from behind whatever he kept things behind. She looked at him. He looked back. The break room held them both in the February morning light, which was not, in fact, better at this table than at any other table. She'd known that all along. And something passed between them that was entirely outside the territory of professional distance or operational proximity, or any of the clean, managed vocabulary of the floor they shared. She said quietly, "Have you lost someone?" He looked at his coffee. The silence lasted exactly long enough for her to understand that the answer was yes, and that yes was something he was not going to give her today. Maybe not ever. But that the yes was there, real and present, living in the careful architecture of how he stood and what he held himself against, and why a man who owned a building had 3 lines on a notepad that he read every morning before he trusted the day to hold. "The contract," he said. "The literary one." She blinked. "Yes?" "The French novelist, Isabelle Arnaud." He looked up from the coffee. "Her rights clauses are specific to the droit moral provisions under French intellectual property law. There's a 2019 amendment that changed the assignability. Make sure your client's British solicitor is working from the current version." She stared at him. "The 2019 amendment," she repeated. "April 15th. Article L.121-1 revised. It affects exactly the clause you were working on last night." She stared at him. He picked up his coffee and walked to the door. "Thank you," she said. He paused at the door. He did not turn around. The line of his shoulders, the back of his neck, the controlled stillness of a man who was holding himself very deliberately in place. "The window table," he said, "in case you were wondering." She blinked. "What?" "The light." He pushed the door open. "It's better here than at the other 3 tables. Marginally. I wasn't lying." He left. She sat at the table for a long moment. She opened her novel. She closed it. She pressed both palms flat on the table, cool and solid. And she thought about a man who knew French intellectual property law well enough to cite a specific clause from a 2019 amendment, who had told her this in a break room on a Saturday instead of an email or a meeting, or not at all. She thought about a door opening an inch. She thought about a hand catching it from the other side. She touched the scar near her eyebrow. She picked up her novel. She opened it to a page she had already read twice. She read it again, and this time none of the words went in, and she decided she was done pretending otherwise. She packed up her things. She walked past his office on the way out, door still ajar, as it always was, as if he were allergic to being fully closed off. She did not stop. She did not look in. She was 3 steps past the door when she heard, very quietly, the sound of a drawer opening and closing. A pause. Then the sound of something being set, carefully, with the particular restraint of hands that were containing more than the action required, on the surface of a desk. She kept walking. She did not know what was in the drawer. She did not know that the thing set back on the desk surface was a file she had never seen. A file that contained her own signature on a page she had no memory of writing, and a plan she was at the center of without knowing it. She did not know any of this. She walked out into the London Saturday, pulling her coat closed, and she thought about the way he'd said, "I'm sorry." Not as a script, but as something surrendered. She thought about a door opening an inch. She wanted it to open further. She didn't know yet what was on the other side. The second week began with rain. Not the apologetic London drizzle that Fatima had made her peace with years ago, the kind that barely commits, that you can walk through with a reasonable coat and emerge only slightly diminished. This was a full declaration. Heavy, cold, arriving on Monday morning with the conviction of something that had been building for days and had finally decided to stop pretending otherwise. She arrived at 7:50, which was nearly on time, which she considered a personal achievement given that the rain had required renegotiating her entire commute from scratch on the pavement outside her flat, with a bag that wouldn't close and a travel cup that was already cooling. She pushed through the lobby door, shook the rain from her coat, said "Good morning, Marcus," without stopping, pressed the lift button, stepped out on 7, and stopped. There was an umbrella leaning against the wall beside the entrance to the translation space. A good one, not the disposable kind that inverted themselves at the first provocation. Solid, navy blue, a wooden handle worn smooth with use. A small paper note was folded and tucked under the handle. She picked up the note. For the commute home. 4 words, no signature. Handwriting so controlled it looked architectural. She stood in the corridor holding the note. Her brain, which was a sophisticated and capable instrument, immediately began generating alternative explanations for how a navy umbrella with a note in a specific handwriting had come to be leaning against the wall beside her department's door at 7:50 on a Monday morning. Her brain generated 0 convincing alternative explanations. She tucked the note into her coat pocket. She picked up the umbrella. She went to her desk, sat down, opened her laptop, and did not look toward the corner office. She did not look toward the corner office for 11 solid minutes, which was the longest she had managed since moving to this floor. Then she looked toward the corner office. He was at his desk. He was reading something. He was not looking at the corridor. She looked back at her screen. "You're a grown woman," she told herself. "He left you an umbrella because it's raining. It is a practical and meaningless gesture, and you are going to treat it as exactly that." She treated it as exactly that for approximately 40 seconds. Then she got up, walked to the break room, made 2 coffees from the Italian machine, both flat white, both exactly right. Walked back, set one on the edge of her own desk, and walked the other, unhurried and deliberate and without any particular ceremony, to the door of the corner office. She set it on the corner of his desk, within his eye line, without entering. He looked up. She looked at him. She went back to her desk. She heard, a moment later, the sound of the coffee cup being picked up. She smiled at her screen, and this time there was no corridor to hide in. But it didn't matter because she had stopped trying to manage it. Priya saw the umbrella at 8:30. She looked at it. She looked at Fatima. She opened her mouth. "Don't," Fatima said. Priya closed her mouth. She opened it again. "I'm just going to say, I know what you're going to say." Then why are you telling me not to say it? Because, Fatima said, if you say it, then I have to respond to it. And I don't have a response yet. And I'd like to keep working until I do. Priya sat down at her desk. She began typing. 40 seconds of silence passed. He left you an umbrella, Fatih. I know. That's not a CEO move. I know. That's I know, Fatima said firmly. I know what it is. I just don't know what to do with it yet. Priya turned back to her screen. For what it's worth, she said, more quietly. You look different this week. Fatima stopped typing. Different how? Like you're listening for something. Priya shrugged, not looking at her. Like you've turned a volume up somewhere. Fatima thought about that. She thought about it for the rest of the morning, in the specific way you think about something you're not thinking about. In the background, persistent, coloring everything at the edges. Grant found her at lunch. Not the break room this time. She'd gone out, the rain having temporarily relented enough to make the walk to the sandwich place around the corner viable. She was on her way back, coat collar up, the navy umbrella, which she had brought entirely out of practicality, keeping her dry, when she heard him behind her. Fatima. She turned. Grant Ellis, coat soaked because he apparently hadn't had the foresight to acquire an umbrella that morning, looking genuinely pleased to see her in the way that she was coming to understand was just his factory setting. Uncomplicated happiness at the presence of other people. She held the umbrella out to cover him, too. You'll drown, she said. He ducked under it gratefully. You're a lifesaver. I forgot. I didn't account for the rain that has been visible since yesterday? I was optimistic. You're going to need a different skill set to survive London winters. He laughed. It was an easy laugh, the kind that didn't ask anything of you, that didn't require a corresponding performance. She had forgotten, she realized, how uncomplicated certain people could be. Not simple. Grant was not simple. He was sharp and warm and interesting, just without the particular density of someone who carried everything under compression. They walked back together under the umbrella. He told her about a contract dispute he was untangling that had turned out to hinge entirely on a single French phrase that had been translated differently in 3 different versions of the document. She made a sound of professional sympathy and then said 3 things about the phrase in question that made him stop walking and stare at her. How do you just have that? He said. She shrugged. 6 languages. You start to see where they disagree with each other. That's either extraordinary or terrifying. Most useful things are both. He smiled at her. She smiled back. There was no weight to it, no layer of calculation beneath it, no slow, deliberate management of distance and proximity, no awareness of her own pulse in the specific way that had become a feature of standing too close to the corner office. It was just pleasant, warm. The feeling of being known at face value by someone who had no other agenda. She thought, I miss this. She thought, when did simple stop being enough? She thought, don't answer that. They pushed back through the lobby door, rain resuming behind them. She shook the umbrella out. Grant was saying something about the French dispute that she responded to on instinct, professional autopilot engaged, because the thinking part of her was still on the walk. In the question she'd almost asked herself. When did simple stop being enough? She knew the answer. She knew exactly when, and she was not going to look at it. because looking at it required admitting things she was not prepared to admit on a Monday in February in the lobby of a building where she had a great deal of work to do. She pressed the lift button. The lift doors opened on 7. She stepped out and turned toward the translation space, and in doing so, turned toward the corridor. Jackson Hale was coming from the direction of the conference rooms, purposeful, as always, not hurried, but with the particular quality of motion that said every step was accounted for, that he did not move without intention. He was going to pass her. She kept walking. He kept walking. The corridor was wide enough that this was a non-event, 2 people passing in a corridor, a thing that happened 40 times a day on any given floor. Except that as he passed her, close enough that she felt the disruption of air, he glanced down at the umbrella. His umbrella. In her hand. Returned to the building dry, as it hadn't been when he'd left it there this morning. He looked at the umbrella. Then at her face. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them slowed down. They passed each other and continued in opposite directions. And Fatima reached her desk and set the umbrella against the wall and sat down and placed both hands flat on the keyboard without typing anything. Her heart, that reliable traitor, was doing something she was going to need to have a serious conversation with it about. On Tuesday, he called her into his office for the first time. Not an email, a call on the internal line. His assistant's voice informing her with the polished neutrality of someone who had spent years encoding the specifics of her employer into bland professionalism. Mr. Hale would like to discuss the Fontaine contract translation at your earliest convenience. Her earliest convenience turned out to be 2:30. She brought her notes. She sat across from the desk, the dark walnut desk she had last seen from the floor, from the perspective of 43 scattered pages, and she placed her notes on the surface between them, and she was entirely professional and composed. He was also entirely professional and composed. This made it worse, somehow. The Fontaine contract was a merger document. French conglomerate acquiring a British manufacturing firm. 600 pages. The kind of translation work that took weeks and required a level of legal and cultural precision that Fatima had spent her career developing. She walked him through the structural challenges. He asked questions, smart ones, the kind that identified the specific points of friction in cross-cultural corporate language with an accuracy that told her he'd read the preliminary brief she'd sent and read it carefully. "The liability clauses," she said, "are the main problem." French corporate law approaches liability as inherently collective, in a way that English law doesn't. There's no clean equivalent. Every translation I produce will either overcommit the English party or underprotect the French one, and the client needs to understand that before we proceed. He looked at her notes. "What would you recommend?" he said. She looked up. He was looking at her directly, not at the notes. At her. The question was genuine, not rhetorical, not a test. He wanted to know what she thought, and the wanting was clean and direct, the way someone asks a question when they've already decided the answer matters to them. "A dual language appendix," she said. "A companion document that explains where the legal frameworks diverge, in plain language, so both parties understand what they're agreeing to, rather than just relying on the translation to bridge a gap that translation can't fully close." She paused. "It's more work. It might delay the timeline." "Do it," he said. She looked at him. "The delay is worth it," he said. "A contract that both parties genuinely understand is worth more than one that moves quickly." He looked back at the notes. "I'll let the client know." She gathered her papers. She was almost at the door when he said, "The are no rights clause." She turned. Did the 2019 amendment help? She looked at him, at the almost imperceptible quality of the question, which was professional on its surface and something else entirely underneath. The way a translation could appear to be about one thing and be about another in its bones. It resolved exactly the problem, she said. Thank you. He nodded. She looked at the notepad on the desk, the 3 lines covered by his hand. Mr. Hale, she said. He looked up. Do you always read French intellectual property law on your weekends? A pause. Something crossed his face, so brief, so carefully managed. But she was a translator. She lived in the spaces between what was said and what was meant, and she caught it. No, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she left. She was 3 steps down the corridor before she understood what the something on his face had been. He'd looked it up. After Saturday. After the break room. After the literary contract. After she'd mentioned the rights clause. He had gone and looked it up and found the amendment, and then delivered it to her in a break room conversation as if it were incidental. He had done the research for her. She pressed her fingers against the scar near her eyebrow and kept walking. The heart knows, she thought, what the eyes haven't seen yet. She had no idea how right that was, and for all the wrong reasons. Grant asked her to lunch on Wednesday. Not the break room, an actual lunch, the Italian place 2 streets from the building that she'd been meaning to try for 6 months. He mentioned it casually at the coffee machine, completely without pressure, in the easy way he did everything, and she said yes, with the simple pleasure of someone accepting an invitation that required nothing complicated in return. She told Priya on the way out. Priya said, "Good." Fatima said, "It's just lunch." Priya said, "I know. He's a nice person." He is. It's not fatty. Priya looked at her steadily. Go have lunch with the nice person. She went. The Italian place was warm and smelled of bread and garlic and the particular comfort of a restaurant that had been feeding people for years and knew what it was doing. Grant was already there. He'd ordered wine without asking, which in any other context might have registered, but he'd ordered the specific white burgundy she'd mentioned once, in passing, during their first break room conversation, in a context so incidental she barely remembered saying it. He'd remembered. She sat down. She looked at the wine. She thought, people pay attention in different ways. She thought about French intellectual property law. She thought about a navy umbrella. She took a sip of wine and made herself be present, because Grant was present, fully, easily, generously present, and she owed him at least the courtesy of the same. They talked for an hour. He told her about Edinburgh, about why he'd transferred, not fleeing anything, which she confirmed by listening to the way he described it, the absence of compression in how he spoke about his life there. He'd just wanted London. Simple as that. He asked her about translation, about what it actually felt like. Not the technical process, but the experience of it, the crossing between languages. Most people asked about the technical process. She told him things she didn't normally say in professional settings. About the grief of an untranslatable word. About the specific joy of finding a crossing that worked in both directions. A phrase that could live in 2 languages without losing anything. About her mother, briefly, lightly. That her mother had spoken 3 languages and moved between them depending on her emotional state. Which meant that Fatima had grown up learning to hear not just what was being said, but which language it was being said in. That's extraordinary, he said. And sad. Yes, she said. Both. He looked at her. She'd be proud of you. It was a simple thing to say. Obvious, even. But she felt it land somewhere real and solid. And she looked at her wine glass and nodded once, and did not trust herself to say anything for a moment. Sorry, he said. That was... No, she said. No. Thank you. They walked back in the thin February sun. A surprise appearance, 20 minutes of pale warmth that felt, after the morning's rain, like a small gift. Grant said something that made her laugh. Genuinely laugh. The kind that arrives before you can manage it. And she felt the pleasure of it, the uncomplicated ease. She was laughing when they came back through the lobby. She was still smiling when the lift opened on 7. She stepped out. Jackson Hale was standing at the end of the corridor. He was looking at her. She saw him look at her. She saw him look at Grant, one step behind her, and she saw, in the fraction of a second before his face returned to its characteristic blankness, something that was entirely outside the vocabulary of CEO and floor management and operational restructuring. Something tight. Something pulled. Something that had a name, and the name was not professional. She held his gaze for a beat. He looked away first. He walked into his office. The door, for the first time, clicked fully closed. She stared at it. "Everything okay?" Grant said. "Yes." She turned back to him, smiled. "Thank you for lunch. It was really lovely." He smiled back, warm and uncomplicated. "We should do it again." "We should," she said. She meant it. She also stood at her desk for the next 20 minutes, watching the closed door at the end of the corridor, in the peripheral vision she could not turn off. And when the door finally opened again at 3:15 and Jackson Hale walked out with his jacket and his phone and the controlled nothing of his expression fully restored, she looked at her screen. She had typed one sentence in 20 minutes. It was in Danish. She didn't speak Danish. She learned it by accident, the way the most important things are usually learned. She had come in early on Thursday, 7:05, which was unusual even for her, the result of a dream that had woken her at 4 and refused to let her back to sleep. Not a bad dream. One of those dreams that are worse than bad because they're warm and specific and involve someone whose face your sleeping mind apparently had no qualms about producing with a clarity your waking mind would never allow itself. She had made tea and read for an hour, and then given up and come to work, where at least the Italian machine was better than the one at home, and the sticky notes were visible reminders that she had a life with content and direction. She had not expected anyone else to be in yet. She was wrong about this. The corner office was lit. She stopped in the corridor. The door was ajar. It was always ajar. And the light from inside fell across the corridor floor in a long, warm rectangle. And she could hear, very faintly, something she hadn't heard in the 4 weeks she'd been on this floor. His voice. Not the contained architectural precision of his work voice. Something else. Quieter. A frequency she hadn't encountered before that made the back of her neck feel different. She was not trying to listen. She was standing in a corridor at 7 in the morning, carrying her travel cup and her bag, and the voice was simply there, and her body had stopped before her mind had processed the decision to stop. "I know," he was saying, low, the word carrying weight, the specific weight of a person having a conversation in which every word is load-bearing. I know that. I'm not saying. A pause. Lily. The name. Low and careful, like a thing you set down gently. I'm not asking you to go back. Fatima stood very still. I just need you to understand that I'm handling it. Another pause. Longer. The quality of a person listening to something they find difficult to hear. No. No, that's not. A sound. Not quite a breath. Not quite a word. The sound of someone managing the specific effort of remaining controlled when the pull is away from it. It wasn't about what you wanted. It was about what happened and what didn't happen after. Silence. I have the file, he said. Flat. Quiet. The sentence of someone confirming a fact they've confirmed before and will confirm again because the fact is the thing they're anchored to. She did not know what file. She did not know who Lily was. She knew only that she was listening to a version of Jackson Hale that she had not been permitted to see before. A version stripped of the calibrated management, the architectural control, the specific economy of a man who had trained himself down to the minimum necessary expression of everything interior. This version had something in his voice that she recognized the way you recognize weather. That particular human frequency of a person who is trying to protect someone and has been trying for a long time and is tired in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. I'll call you Sunday, he said. I love you. The last three words were quiet in the way that love between siblings is quiet. Not romantic, not performed, but the sturdy, ordinary love of two people who have been through something real. She heard it the way you hear a fact. She heard it, and she stood in the corridor, and something that had been building in her chest for 4 weeks, something she had been filing under professional, under complicated, under none of your business, Fatima, cracked open a millimeter. The sound of him setting his phone down. She moved. She walked past the door, quickly, silently, the way you move when you've been somewhere you weren't supposed to be. She made it to the break room. She set her travel cup down. She stood at the window and pressed her palm flat against the glass and looked out at the dark London morning, still mostly night, the city lights scattered across it like something dropped. Lily, she thought. I have the file. She did not know what any of it meant. She knew only that beneath the plan, whatever the plan was, because she had felt the plan for weeks now, the deliberate quality of his movements, the distance that had the architecture of a decision rather than a preference. Beneath all of it was a person. A real, costly, paying the price of it person. The Italian machine was warm beside her. She made 2 coffees. She walked back down the corridor. She stopped at the corner office door. She looked at the rectangle of light on the floor, at the hand visible at the edge of the desk, pressed flat against the surface, the way it always was. She set the coffee on the floor, just inside the door. She did not go in. She did not say anything. She went to her desk. At 7:43, she heard him come out of the office. She heard his footsteps in the corridor. She heard them pause, brief, barely a pause, the length of time it takes to look down and find something unexpected on the floor. Then the sound of the cup being picked up. Then the footsteps continuing. Then stopping. Just outside the translation space. She kept her eyes on her screen. His voice from the doorway. You're in early. Couldn't sleep, she said. A beat. The Fontaine appendix is moving well, she said. I should have the first section to you by end of week. "There's no rush," he said. She looked up. He was in the doorway, her coffee in his hand. He looked different at this hour, not disarranged, not undone, but before the full assembly of the day's persona. The controlled nothing slightly thinner, the edges of him slightly more present. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "There's no rush," he said again, quieter. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. She said, before she could stop herself, "Are you all right?" The question landed in the room between them and stayed there. He looked at her for a long moment, long enough for her to understand that the question had gone somewhere real, that it had found something real to land on, that he was not going to deflect it with the clean professionalism he deployed against everything else that got too close. He stopped. He looked at the coffee. He said, "I have a sister. She works in Edinburgh now." He said this to the coffee cup, not to Fatima. The voice calibrated to the specific neutrality of someone offering a fact as a substitute for the feeling behind it. "She's doing well." "That's good," Fatima said, carefully. "Yes," he looked up. "She didn't always." The words sat between them, not demanding anything, not asking for a response, just placed there, with the quiet precision of a person doing something they hadn't planned and hadn't stopped. Fatima said softly, "I'm glad she does now." He looked at her face. She looked back. The morning held them both, the barely light London morning, the empty floor, 2 cups of coffee from the Italian machine, and something between them that was outside the file in the drawer, and outside the plan, and outside every clean, managed architectural thing he had built to bring him to this floor for the purpose he had come here for. He nodded. He went back to his office. The door was ajar. She found the notepad on Friday afternoon. Not his notepad. She would never have gone anywhere near that. This was a different one, left on the small table beside the Translation Space's printer. A page torn out and folded once, with her name on the outside, in the handwriting she'd come to know the way you come to know a person's voice. Before you can explain how, before you've counted the hours of exposure, your body just begins to recognize it. She unfolded it. It contained one line. The dual language appendix was the right call. J. She looked at the line for a long time. She turned the paper over. Blank. She folded it back along its crease and held it in both hands, and thought about the specific, devastating economy of a person who wanted to say something, and said the smallest possible version of it. She thought about what the smallest possible version pointed toward. J. Not Jackson Hale. Not J.H. Not the formal letterhead of every communication they'd had on record. J. Like someone had stood at the edge of something for a long time, and then leaned forward, just slightly, just enough for the lean to be visible. She put the note in the same pocket as the first one, for the commute home. She had 2 notes now. She was keeping them. She was not going to examine why she was keeping them with the scrutiny it deserved, because the scrutiny would produce a conclusion she wasn't quite ready for. And it was Friday, and the Fontaine appendix needed attention. She went back to work. She thought about the notes every 45 minutes for the rest of the afternoon. She was aware that this was not rational. She was aware that she was a 32-year-old head of department with a postgraduate degree in linguistics and the professional respect of a room full of international clients, experiencing heart palpitations over 2 sentences from a man she had known for 4 weeks, one of which was about an umbrella. She was fully aware of all of this. She kept the notes anyway. Friday evening. She was alone on the floor again. Her team had left. The building had its end-of-week stillness, that specific Friday exhale. She was finishing the first section of the Fontaine Appendix. Deep in it, genuinely absorbed, the intellectual pleasure of the work carrying her out of the noise of everything else. She had her headphones in. Something that was not ambient this time, something warmer. A playlist she'd made a long time ago that she associated with the feeling of being settled. She did not hear him come in. She felt it. The disruption of air. The particular atmospheric shift. She looked up. He was standing inside the translation space. Not at the doorway this time. Inside. He was looking at her desk. Not at her face, not at the screen, but at the photograph. Her mother's photograph. The beach in Agadir, both of them laughing. He was looking at it with an expression she had not seen on him before. Unmanaged. The door that was always an inch from closing standing open, just for a moment, while he didn't know she was watching him. There was something in his face she recognized. She recognized it because she'd felt it. She felt it every morning when she sat down and the photograph caught the light, and the loss of it moved through her chest like weather, like the specific atmospheric pressure of something irrevocable. He was grieving something. Not her mother, he hadn't known her mother, but something of his own. Something private and carried and not set down. She pulled out one headphone. He startled. Barely. Just the micro-adjustment of someone recalibrating. And looked at her face. She looked back. He stopped. Looked at the photograph. I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were... It's fine. Mr. Hale. He stopped. She said, carefully, You don't have to go. The silence lasted a full 4 seconds. She counted them. Then he walked to the chair beside Priya's desk, the spare one, the one people sat in when they came to talk to Priya about things they didn't want the whole office to hear. And he sat down. He sat down with the specific care of a very large, very controlled person making themselves smaller. And he looked at the photograph from this new distance, and then he looked at his hands. She watched him. She laughed like that, he said. She didn't ask who. She waited. My mother. He said it to his hands. The low, flat voice, stripped of its usual architecture. She would laugh, and the whole room would know about it. A pause. She died when I was 24. Lily was 19. He turned the word Lily over carefully, as if checking whether it was safe to release it. He stopped. It made certain things very clear. She waited. It made it clear, he said, that the world does not have a particular interest in fairness, and that if you want something protected, you protect it yourself. That you do not rely on... He stopped again. He looked up from his hands to her face. She was watching him with the full, direct, unhurried quality of her attention. Not pitying. Not performing empathy. Not doing anything except being present with him in the room in the way that was her most natural and instinctive state. He looked at her for a long moment. She had a photograph like that, he said, nodding at the beach picture. My mother. It was the one I took with me when I went to university. She looked at the photograph. At her mother's laugh, which she would never hear again, fixed permanently into the silver paper of a photograph she had carried from flat to flat for 14 months. Carrying them with us, she said quietly. It's the best we can do. He was quiet. she said. What happened to Lily? The name landed between them. She watched him absorb it, the fact that she'd heard that morning in the corridor. He looked at her steadily, processing the acknowledgement. Not angry. Something more complicated. Something that shouldn't have happened, he said, in a place that should have been safe for her. He paused. I wasn't here. I was in Geneva. And when I found out, he stopped. I came back. To fix it, she said. His eyes found hers. Yes, he said. She held his gaze. She felt, with the translator's instinct she'd spent her career trusting, that there was a great deal more in what he'd just said than the words themselves contained. That the architecture beneath it was complex and specific, and that she was somewhere inside it in a way she didn't yet understand. She felt this, and she filed it, the way she filed things she couldn't fully translate yet. Is she safe now? Fatima asked. Lily? He looked at her for a long moment. She's getting there, he said. The warmth in his voice when he said it, quiet, compressed. The warmth of someone who had been working toward a thing for a long time and could see it from where they were standing, moved through her chest like the first day of something. She thought, there he is. She thought, that's who's underneath all of it. She thought, oh, this is going to cost me something. She looked at the photograph of her mother laughing on a beach in Agadir 2 years before she got sick. Your mother would have liked knowing you came back for her, Fatima said. He looked at her. She held his gaze and did not look away. His hand, resting on his knee, pressed down. Then he stood, straightened his jacket. The assembly of the day's persona carefully restored. Not all the way, not completely. There were things visible now that hadn't been before and couldn't be fully covered. But enough. Go home, Ms. Hassan, he said. It's Friday. You too, she said. He walked to the door. Mr. Hale, she said. He turned. The photograph. She looked at her desk. I carry it so she can see where I am. She paused. I think they stay interested. I think they want to know how it turns out. He looked at her with the dark, unhurried eyes and the open door and the fractional, barely there thing that moved across his face and did not get caught in time. He said, I hope so. He left. She sat alone in the translation space and the amber evening light, and she pressed both palms flat on the desk in front of her, and she breathed, slowly. And she thought about a man sitting in a spare chair with his hands turned down and his voice stripped of its management, and a dead mother in his chest, and a sister he was protecting, and a plan she could feel but couldn't see. She thought, whatever you're planning, Jack. She caught herself. Jackson, she corrected. But the correction didn't hold. She broke first. She would think about this later, that it was her, not him. It happened on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after she first landed on the 7th floor. 3 weeks of coffee cups and navy umbrellas and notes folded along a single crease, and a man in a spare chair with his voice stripped down to its architecture. 3 weeks of watching the door at the end of the corridor and telling herself she wasn't watching it. She broke in the break room, of all places, at the Italian machine, at 8:15 in the morning, in the middle of what should have been an entirely unremarkable cup of coffee. She'd had a dream about her mother again. Not the warm one, the other kind, the specific cruelty of a sleeping mind that produces a fully realized version of someone you've lost. A dream so sensory and complete that the moment of waking feels like losing them a second time. She had woken at 5:30 with her mother's voice still in her head, and the particular quality of the silence that followed it. The silence that was not peaceful, not home quiet, but the roaring, specific absence of a person who was supposed to be there. She had made tea. She had read. She had come to work. She had been functioning perfectly adequately for 3 hours. And then she was at the Italian machine, cup in hand, and she caught the reflection of the window behind her. And in the window, in the light, there was a quality of the morning that was exactly the quality of the morning in Agadir, the day of the photograph. The specific gold gray of early Mediterranean light. And her mother had been standing beside her and had said, "Habibi, look at the color of it." She set down her cup. She pressed both hands on the counter. She breathed through her nose, once, twice. "Don't," she told herself. "Not here. Not now. You have the Fontaine appendix and the 9 o'clock call, and Ren needs Fatima." Low. Quiet. She did not turn around. His footsteps, the measured, even footsteps she could now identify from anywhere on the floor, stopped behind her. She kept her hands on the counter and her eyes on the machine, and she breathed. "I'm fine," she said. He said nothing. She felt him there, the disruption of air, the specific atmospheric quality of his presence, which she had mapped with the precision of a person who has stopped pretending they aren't paying attention. "I'm fine," she said again, more firmly. The way you say something twice when the first time didn't convince anyone, including yourself. He still said nothing. And somehow the nothing, his specific quality of nothing, which was not absence but presence, not inattention but the fullest attention she had ever felt directed at her, broke the last of what she'd been holding in place since 5:30. She turned around. She looked at him. He was closer than she expected. Not invasive close, not improper, just the close of a person who had moved towards something without theatrics. He was looking at her face with the dark, unhurried eyes and the open expression. Not the open of the planned meetings or the boardroom or the professional 7th floor. The other open. The spare chair open. He was just looking at her. And she said, with all the distance stripped out of her voice, "I dream about her. Still. Every few weeks I dream about her, and she's just there. She's entirely there. Her voice and her hands and the way she smelled of jasmine always. And then I wake up, and the waking up is the worst part. Every time. The waking up is—" She stopped. Her voice had done something she hadn't given it permission to do. She looked at the counter. "Sorry," she said. I don't normally—" "Don't apologize for that," he said. She looked up. He was looking at her with something she had never seen on a human face that was also specifically his face. The combination of it, the particular way it sat on the architecture of him, the controlled man with the pressed-down hands and the 3 lines on a notepad, looking at her with something completely unmanaged and entirely real. "When my mother died," he said, "I dreamed about her for 2 years." He said it quietly, to the space between them. "The dreams were the best part. I hated waking up. I hated it for 2 years." She looked at him. And then one morning, he said, the dream was different. She wasn't there the way she'd been. She was just— He paused. She was just in the background of something, like she'd stopped visiting and started staying. He looked at her. I don't know if that helps. She stared at him for a long time. She felt the thing in her chest that had been a closed fist for 14 months. Tight, held, managed. Open, slightly, around the edges. Yes, she said. It helps. He nodded. She looked at him, at the full, specific, inconveniently real person standing in the break room of a 7th floor in February with a coffee he hadn't made yet, having given her something she didn't know she needed. She looked at him, and she thought about the plan she could feel, and the file she didn't know about, and the name Lily, and something that shouldn't have happened in a place that should have been safe. She thought about all of it, and underneath all of it was this. A man whose mother died when he was 24, and who dreamed about her for 2 years, and who had a 3-word system for getting through the days. Don't let it in. She thought. Too late. She thought. For both of us, I think. She reached past him, close, closer than she needed to be to reach the machine, and she made his coffee. She didn't ask if he wanted one. She didn't ask how he took it. She made it the way she'd been making it for 3 weeks from observation alone. Black, strong, exact temperature. And she set it on the counter beside him. She picked up her own cup. He looked at the coffee, at her face. She said, "I'm not going to keep pretending I don't notice the cups." The words sat between them. His expression moved, that fractional, calibrated movement, the door opening an inch and the hand on the other side, and this time, the hand was slower to catch it. "The cups," he said. 3 weeks, she said. "The days I'm first in, always perfect, always the Italian machine." He looked at her. She looked back. "Don't insult me by claiming it's someone else," she said. Something crossed his face. Something that was not amusement, and was not pain, and was not the controlled nothing, but was its own specific thing, born from the intersection of all three. "I wasn't going to," he said. She felt the weight of that land. She felt the weight of it, and she thought, there are things I don't know about this. There are things he hasn't said. There is something in the file in the drawer, and a plan with my name in it that I cannot see. She felt this. She stayed anyway. "Thank you," she said, "for the coffees, for the umbrella, for the French law." She paused. "For the dream." He looked at her. "The dream?" "What you said, about her staying." She looked at the Arabic line in her mind, her mother's handwriting, warm and permanent. "I'll think about that." She picked up her cup. She walked to the door. She stopped. She turned around. He was watching her, the coffee in his hand. The full, unmanaged quality of him for just this moment, before the floor filled and the day assembled and the careful architecture went back up.